Hello everyone, I am Aniket Dattatreya Takle. Today I am telling about human integumentary system. In that, so let's start. In that, the integumentary system is a system comprised of organs that are the outermost protective covering of the animal body, the skin and its various derivatives. The integumentary system protects against many threats such as infections, desiccations, abrasions, chemical assault, and radiation damage. In humans, the primary organ of the integumentary system is the skin. Along with skin, several other glands and different sensory units like somatosensory receptors and nociceptors are also a part of this organ system. So let's discuss about organs of the integumentary system, structure and their functions. In that, the integumentary system is composed of skin and its appendages, subcutaneous tissue, deep fascia, mucocutaneous junctions, and breast. So let's start. First one is skin. In that skin is the largest organ in our body. It covers up to 2 meters square of the body surface area and contains numerous glands and sensory units. In that also, the skin is continuous but structurally different from the mucous membrane that lines the buccal cavity. In that structure of skin, structurally the skin is a multicellular organ composed of two distinct layers of tissues, and outer epidermis developed from ectoderm and the inner dermis derived from the mesoderm. In that related, abundance of the two layers differs according to the environment. First one is epidermis. In that, epidermis is a stratified epithelium and usually quite thin in comparison of the dermis. In that, it is the outer layer of skin that has no blood vessels supply, and the cells in the squamous epithelium receives blood via diffusion. In that, it is a further distinguished into two regions. First one is the outermost region of many layers of dead, usually flattened, that means squamous cells, forms a horny resistant covering or stratum corneum on the skin surface. In that, its cells accumulate a horny protein called as keratin, gradually die and eventually wear off in the form of scurf or dandruff. In that, the innermost or basal region of epidermis includes a single row of living columnar cells, that means the malpighian layer or stratum germinatum, which is separated from the underlying dermis by a basement membrane. That in that, its cells actively divide and continually replace the worn out cells of the cornified layer. In that, besides, the epithelium also contains a few cells like melanocytes, which are responsible for the pigmentation on skin. The function is, since keratin is tough and insoluble in water, in that the keratinized stratum corneum protects against mechanical injuries, fungal and bacterial attacks, and also loss of body moisture. In that, melanin in the epidermis protects dermis and other internal organs against exposure to ultraviolet rays and its damaging effects. In that, the epidermis is also responsible for the synthesis of vitamin D under the exposure of ultraviolet rays from the sunlight. In that, also the Langerhans cells found in the epidermis are a part of the skin immune system and protect against foreign antigens. In that also, the sensory cells and receptors in the epidermis are responsible for sensation in the skin. Second layer is dermis. In that, dermis or corium, which is the inner layer of skin, is comparatively thicker than the epidermis. It is composed of fibrous connective tissue and contains many blood capillaries, lymph vessels, muscle fibers, nerve fibers, sense organs, and elastic fibers, which bring the skin back to its normal shape. In that, pigment cells or melanocytes are mostly located in the dermis, although sometimes pigments granules are also found in the epidermis. And that also, fat may accumulate as reserve food in specialized cells called as adipocytes in deeper parts of the dermis and the subcutaneous tissue. And that also, different glands like sweat glands and sebaceous glands are also present in the dermis. The function of dermis is the blood in that The blood vessels present in the dermis provide nourishment and waste removal from its cells as well as from the base of the epidermis. In that also, dermis helps in thermoregulation as the sweat glands promote evaporation, resulting in a loss of excessively body heat. In that also, dermis also provides support to the epidermis and allows the base for the cells. Third layer is hypodermis, and that hypodermis layer, it is the innermost and thickest layer of the skin. Instead, is the deeper subcutaneous tissue made up of fat and connective tissue. In that, this layer consists of cells like fibroblasts, fat cells, connective tissue, larger nerves, and blood vessels and macrophages. In that, the purpose of hypodermis is to attach the skin to underlying bone and muscles as well as supplying the other layers of skin with blood vessels and nerves. In that, the hypodermis is made up of loose connective tissue and elastin protein. In that, the thickness of this layer differs in different parts of our body, and it is also significantly different in males and females. Then also it is the thickest in the shoulders and the abdomen in men, while in females it is thicker in the hips and thighs. The function of hypodermis is hypodermis contains a large amount of fat which functions as energy storage. That also the thick layer protects the external agents and also acts as an insulator protecting against cold. In that also this layer provides attachment between the epidermis and the dermis to the internal organs in the body. In that an appetite regulating hormone called leptin is also synthesized by fat cells in the hypodermis layer. Second one is appendages of skin. In that appendages of skin, the skin itself is relatively simple, but its derivatives are numerous and complex. In that, these derivatives are termed appendages of the skin and are formed from derived epidermal cells. The first one is epidermal glands. In that epidermal glands, integumental or epidermal glands are formed by the Malpighian layers of epidermis that arise in the epidermis but often invade the dermis. In that also they may be unicellular or multicellular, tubular or alveolar in shape and simple, compound or branched. In that also they are lined by cuboidal cells or columnar epithelium and are usually named after their nature or function. That also some of the common epidermal glands found in humans and other mammals are first one is sebaceous glands. In that sebaceous glands, the sebaceous gland consists of secondary epithelial cells derived from the same tissue as the hair follicles. There also these glands secrete an oily antimicrobial substance sebum into the hair follicles. That also sebaceous glands are present in all parts of the body except the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. In that, the number of these glands is higher in the scalp, face, axillae, and groins. In that structure of sebaceous gland, most sebaceous glands are attached to hair follicles, and the size of the gland varies inversely with the diameter of the associated hair. In that also, a large diameter hair has a small gland, and vice versa. There also these are two true holocrine glands. In that gland in which the secretion is formed by the degeneration of the entire glandular cell. That also they open to the surface of the skin by way of the pilosebaceous canal. There also this holocrine type of gland has multiple acinar components. The acinus of each gland converges towards a common excretory duct. The function of sebaceous gland is sebum helps to keep the hair soft and playable and gives it a shiny appearance. It also provides some waterproofing on the surface of the skin and acts as a bactericidal and fungicidal agent, preventing infection. And also the sebum also prevents drying and cracking of the skin, especially on exposure to heat and sunlight. Like also in second one gland is serminous gland. That mammary glands, that mammary glands is important gland in humans. In that memory glands, a characteristic of mammals, these are compound tubular glands that produce milk during lactation period for feeding the young ones. That also these glands are present in all mammals and are rudimentary and non-functional in men. In that in humans, these glands develop at puberty by the action of growth hormone and estrogen. However, in other primates, breast development usually happens after the pregnancy. Structure of memory glands are structurally tear shaped and are composed of glandular tissue, fibrous tissue, fatty tissue, and blood supply. An adult female breast consists of around 20 lobes of glandular tissue, which where each lobe is made up of several lobules that radiate around the nipple. Each of these lobules is composed of a group of alveoli that terminate into small ducts, which collectively form large excretory ducts called as lactiferous ducts. That also these ducts supported by the dense connective tissues converge towards the center of the breasts to form reservoirs also called as lactiferous sinus of milk. From each of these sinuses, a single duct arises that opens into the nipple. Function is the primary function of the mammary glands is to provide nourishment to the infant through breastfeeding. In addition to their primary function of providing nutrients to the infant, breasts also have social and sexual prominence. Breasts and especially the nipples are an erogenous zone. Second one is hair and hair follicles. In that, hair are characteristics of mammals. They may cover the entire body or may be reduced to patches or scattered hairs. In that, hairs are the cornified epidermal products of the integument. In that also, all the hairs on the surface of the skin are periodically lost by molting and are replaced by new sets of hairs. The structure of hair is each hair originates from the bottom of a tubular invagination or hair follicle of the germinative layer of the epidermis into the dermis. In that also, a cluster of cells called the hair papilla or bulb is present at the base of the follicle. That also the hair is formed by the division of cells of the bulb and they become keratinized when the old cells are pushed upwards away from their source of nutrition. That also the part of the hair above the skin is called the shaft while the remainder is termed the root. Typically, the hair shaft consists of three layers: an external cuticle made up of overlapping microscopic scales, the middle cortex containing shriveled cells and pigments, and an inner medulla containing air spaces in large hairs. Function is the chief functions of hair seems to serve for insulation of body and a sensitive tactile organ. Example is fibrissae in rabbits. That hairs also function in the regulation of body temperature and the facilitation of evaporation of respiration or perspiration. A third one is nails. In that nails, human nails are equivalent to the claws, horns, and hooves of animals. In that, it is derived from the same cells as epidermis and hair. These are hard, horny keratin plates that protects the tips of the fingers and toes. In that structure of nails is in that the nail organ consists of epithelial and connective tissue parts. In that the nail consists of the nail matrix that produces the nail plate and is mostly under the proximal nail wall and the nail bed epithelium, which ensures firm adhesion to the dermis of the nail bed. Then also the root of the nail is embedded in the skin and covered by the cuticle, which forms the hemispherical pale area called the lunula. Then also the nail plate is the exposed part that has grown out from the nail bed. The function of nail is the primary function of the nail is to protect the fingertip and the surrounding soft tissues from injuries. Then also nails also exert a counter pressure that aids in the precise movement and touch sensitivity. And then also next part is physiology of the integumentary system. In that, development of skin color, like means skin pigmentation. In that, the skin color in humans is determined by different pigments like melanin, keratin, and hemoglobin. Among all the pigments, melanin is the most crucial pigment for skin coloration and is formed only in the cytoplasm of the melanin forming cells, the melanocyte. In that, melanin exists in two forms. First one is eumelanin, which gives the black and brown color, and phenomelanin, which gives the red coloration. In general, there are more melanocytes per square millimeter on exposed skin than in covered areas. However, there is highly density of melanocytes about the genitalia and the nasal mucous membranes. In that, variations in skin color between racial groups and possibly between different individuals of the same race are a function of the rate and amount of melanin production by the melanocytes rather than the number of melanocytes present. That also, these are the dendritic or branch cells that are found at the epidermal dermal junction of the skin and mucous membranes. In that, these dermal melanocytes reach the epidermis and become epidermal melanocytes. Melanocytes remaining down in the dermis in the human being gradually become inactive on exposure to the ultraviolet radiation of the sun. The keratinocytes are stimulated to release chemicals which in turn stimulate the melanocytes to produce melanin. The melanin produced in the melanocytes is then transferred to the keratinocytes via a cell organelles called as melanosome, which result in the accumulation of melanin in the keratinocytes. In that, melanosome contains a copper containing enzyme called tyrosinase, which catalyzes the synthesis of melanin from tyrosine. That the accumulation of melanin results in the darkening of the skin. After the exposure to the skin, it takes about 10 days for melanin synthesis to the peak. Similarly, as new skin is formed, epidermal cells move outward to become the stratum corneum, and the melanin granules contained within them are carried along and appear in the stratum corneum not as granules any longer but as fine irregular pigmented particles. Next one is hair growth. Hair is a component of the integumentary system and extends downwards into the dermal layer where it sits in the hair follicle. Similar to the skin, hair forms by rapid division and differentiation of stem cells, which form keratinocytes that migrate, flatten, and die, forming keratinized cells. In that, the final hair products that is exposed on the surface of the skin will be composed entirely of keratin. That also, the growth of the hair follicle is cyclical. This cycle can be divided into three phases. First one is anagen, that means growth. Second one is catagen, that means transition, and third one is telogen, that means rest. In that, anagen growth is the active phase in which the hair follicle takes on its onion like shape and works to produce the hair fiber. In that, the synthesis of the hair shape, shaft, and pigmentation only takes place in the anergism phase. The axial symmetry within the hair bulb decides the curvature of the final hair structure. By the end of anergism, the mitotic activity of the matrix cells is reduced and the follicle enters a highly controlled involuntary phase known as the catagen. In that, catagen lasts approximately 2 weeks in humans, and during this phase, the proximal part of the hair shaft becomes keratinized and forms the club hair. In contrast, the distal portion of the follicle loses one-sixth of its diameter by apoptosis. In that, the telogen stage is the duration between the completion of catagen and the onset of the next anagen phase. Telogen stage lasts for 2 to 3 months, and approximately 10 to 15% of all hairs in the scalp are in this stage. In the telogen stage, the hair shaft is transformed into club hair and finally shed. In that, These phase last until anagen initiating signals from the dermal papilla stimulates the hair jump to show enhanced proliferative and transcriptional activity leading to the initiation of anagen. Second, then next part is nail growth. The In that the nail is the most significant skin appendage. It grows continuously through life in a, non-cyclical manner. Its growth is not hormone dependent. In that the nail of the middle finger of the dominant hand grows fastest with approximately zero point 0.1 mm per day, whereas the big toenail grows only 0.03 to 0.05 millimeter per day. In that the nail size and shape vary characteristically from finger to finger and from toe to toe, for which the size and shape of the bone of the terminal phalanx and are responsible. In that the nail is a continuously and lifelong growing keratin plate that is biochemically identical to the hair shaft. In that also the growth of nails occurs via extrusion, meaning that new growing cells are added to the base while the old cells are pushed outward to the fingertips. That also the keratin in the old cells becomes harder and ultimately the cells become dead and just hardened structures. In that also some of the living cells are still present on the nail at the base in the form of the white moon-like lunula. In that also the cells growth occurs mostly in the germinal matrix in the nail bed. The cells that provide shine to the nail surface are added on top of the nail fold. With the growth of the nail, it is forced into the concave structure. Next part is functions of the integumentary system. That the integumentary system of vertebrates is genuinely a jack of all trades since it perform several essential functions. That means protections, thermoregulation, excretion, also formation of vitamin D, then cutaneous sensation or absorption. That's are all about human integumentary system. Thank you.